Hello there everybody, very welcome back to another album review. This time around we have Noughty By Nature, which is Digga D's 2022 album. As usual, we have a lot of things to cover, so let's just jump straight into it, shall we? On my EP review of Low Skied Censored, I got this really nice comment by Isaac Newton49, who asked me to check this album out. So without any further ado, let's jump straight into it, shall we? In trying to make some sense of what this album is, I have split up the tracklist in categories of songs. First, we have the classic Digga D tracks. These feature disses, talk of women, violence, and some talk of his own success and wealth. As you can see, this is the vast majority of the album. Next up, we have the storytelling tracks, of which I honestly expected more, given the cover and the name of the album, but we'll get into all of that later on. We have some vibey tracks that the mainstream fan will probably like quite a lot, but honestly, Digga D's classic tracks are also quite appreciated by the average mainstream fan. And lastly, we have the samples, which are all 50 Cent songs that have sort of been bundled together at the start of the album. And here Digga gives his own spin on some classic 50 Cent tracks, namely Stunt 101, 21 Questions, and Best Friends on track 5, 6, and 7. And some tracks have been more heavily sampled than others and lean more into the 50 Cent thing than others, but you will definitely hear that when listening to this album. Before I checked this one out, I sort of expected Digga D to take us as the listeners on a story throughout his life, judging by the cover of the album. Sort of we see the Londoner grow up. The intro started off exactly as that, and I was immediately hooked to what he had to say, and I was really touched in particular by the way he sort of wore his heart on his sleeve. That quickly shifted, however, as the album progressed, and we got some classic Digga D. Then we got introduced to the samples from 50 Cent's music, and after that the mood changed again, and Digga D went back to his classic content, ending on a vibey note with AJ Tracey and Maverick Sabre. This is not really criticism, just an observation to highlight that my initial impressions were not fully accurate. And sure, Digga does share parts of his life in every track, but it was not really presented in that really coherent manner that I initially expected from just looking at the cover. I'm sure diehard fans will know exactly how to piece everything together, and there was storytelling spread throughout the entire album, but I did not really feel like it was presented as that journey throughout the artist's life that I initially expected. Lyrics-wise, I was not really impressed with this album, except for once more the intro, where Digga D is really open-hearted, candid, and he shares what I expected this album to be all about, namely his life. He firstly tells us about his school days and the fact that there are people who he grew up with who have now turned into rivals. Next, he tells us all about what his first experience with girls and drugs was like and where he grew up in that phase of his life, namely with his nan, who sadly passed away when Digga D was very young. And finally, near the end of the intro, Digga D addresses, as far as I could find at least, for the very first time on a song, the famous altercation he was involved with. He mentions that infamous video of him that still circulates on the internet nowadays, where members of the opposition caught him by himself and made him essentially swear off the gang he was part of at that point. He goes on to describe how he took it on the chin and went on to buy a gun, insinuating that he will get back at them to defend his pride. Another thing that really stood out to me was the American influence that was present throughout the album. We had that sequence of tracks from 5 to 7 that feature the samples from 50 Cent songs. And then there's that list of USA artists that all sort of brought something different to the table. We have B-Love, who brought that sweeper style that is still very popular in the New York drill scene. We have Moneybagg Yo, who brought some of that classic USA flavor from Memphis, Tennessee. And then we had Hot Boy, who's an artist that is clearly very comfortable with the singing and auto-tune style that is really popular in the US as well. Okay, now it's time to get into a little bit of an overview and really digest and rate what I thought of this album. The lyrical content was a little bit hit or miss for me. There were some clever sequences, some nice wordplay, and a couple of things that really made you sit back, but it was mostly just a little bit repetitive in my opinion, but I may be biased here as I have listened to quite a lot of songs in the genre at this point. So I would rate the lyrical content at 3 overall. Next up are the instrumentals. They were definitely not all my cup of tea. He clearly chose some versatile instrumentals, in particular for the songs with the US artist, and that mega feature song Secret was also one that felt really fresh and jumpy. The other tracks were different in style, and he sort of switched it up a couple of times, but the instrumentals didn't really grab my attention. So I would rate them at 3. The performance was also a little bit of a mixed bag. Digga D is really talented, that much is clear, there is simply no denying that. But on this album, he experimented a little bit with different styles, and he even sang with some autotune in a few. But I felt that the performance was a little bit all over the place sometimes. He kept it sort of good at most points, but there were some tracks where I was really not that impressed with what he did. So overall, I would rate the performance at 3.5. The development, however, that Digga D is going on in this part of his career is quite significant. As I mentioned before, he took a lot of US influences aboard for this project, and I think it did him a lot of good to try out different things and move away from the strictly UK drill scene / style, which can be very restrictive creatively sometimes. So I would rate the development a 4. The replay value on this album is pretty good for me personally. I feel like there's something here for different occasions. However, I wouldn't really play the entire album over and over again. There's a little bit too much filler and repetitiveness in an album, and the performance is a little bit too all over the place sometimes for an album that's 40 minutes. So it's not really consistent enough for me to replay the entire thing. However, you can definitely nitpick or pick out a couple of tracks on this album and have something for a lot of different occasions. So overall, I would rate the replay value at 3. Overall, Digga D did a really good job on this album. He brought some new influences to the scene, and he built some bridges with artists overseas without it being too forced of a collaboration, which I can always applaud. I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't really get that story I was so desperate for, and that he can clearly bring us, as he showed on that intro that I keep mentioning over and over again. It really made me want more of that, and I was just so happy and really anticipating this album to be more of that, but unfortunately it wasn't really. So the album Noughty By Nature by Digga D gets a 3 out of 5 in my opinion. He did well, but he needs to trim the fat off the bone a little bit and bring more of that quality we know he has in-house. Thank you so much for watching again. Leave your opinions on the album and my rating down below. Make sure to also just suggest what I should check out next, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thank you so much, guys.